everybody, this is Ashley. Welcome back to another lovely Layering with Ashley. Today I'm going to be creating a card using one of the new stamp sets from the newest stamp and die release, and this is Balloon Bunch. You can see it makes this really beautiful three-dimensional image, and we're going to be creating a card that looks a lot like this one today. Of course, on the back you can see that we have our layering guide, and you can see the image from the first and second layers create this really shiny and three-dimensional looking balloon, and I just think that's so beautiful. We're going to switch it up just a little bit, but I will show you that in just a moment. The first thing I'm going to do is put these on a piece of 110-pound cardstock, and I'm going to ink all of these up in the same color and do this a few times because we're going to be using lots of different balloons. So I'm using Frosty Pink Crisp Dye Ink for my first layer. Now I'm going to go ahead and line up my second layers. These are extremely easy to line up because they keep the same shape. So if you're new at layering stamps, this is a great stamp set to start with. For our second layer, we're going to be using the same exact color, Frosty Pink, but this time we're going to be using our mixed media pigment ink. This ink is very thick and very dense, and it's beautiful when stamped. It stamps just gorgeous. And the reason that I'm using the same color is because, one, the color on top of the same color will still make it a little bit darker, but also the texture change from the crisp dye ink to the pigment ink is going to be enough differentiation that it's going to look perfect. And I love the way that this came out. So let's try that one more time. So this is our first layer, and I'm using Coral Berry Crisp Dye Ink. And this is one of my favorite colors from Altenew. It's just so vibrant, and I use it all the time. So I'm excited to see how this turns out. So here is our first layer with the crisp dye ink of Coral Berry. And then again, we're going to go in and line up our second layer. We'll close the MISTI door to pick up those stamps. And now we're going to grab our Coral Berry Mixed Media ink. Now while I'm stamping this, you can see that I'm stamping a little bit with a lighter hand. And you can see that it completely saturates those stamps with just a few taps. This ink, like I said, is very thick, it's very dense, and the texture that you get when you stamp is really what is special about these mixed media inks. Stamped once, it looks flat enough that you might not notice it, but you can absolutely, when you're paying attention to it, or especially if you double it up, you can definitely tell there's a texture change there between the dye inks and the pigment inks. I went ahead and used the Forest Glades color and the Frayed leaf color for my green balloons, and then the yellow balloons I used a different pigment ink that I had just because Altenew does not have a yellow mixed media ink just yet. I thought about leaving the yellow out altogether, but I thought that this color scheme really needed it, so I just went for it. I am using my heat tool to accelerate the drying process here because these mixed media inks do take a little bit longer to dry. So just to make sure that they're dry through and through, I went ahead and hit them with my heat tool. Now I'm arranging all of these balloons onto my cardstock. I'm taking note of that inspiration in the trifold pamphlet that I really liked, but I'm also adding my own design to it as well. I want to make sure that I switch up the colors a bit and that I make sure that my design and my idea for the design comes through. So now that I have everything where I think I'd like it, what I'm going to do is stamp the balloon strings. And to make sure I get this on at the right spots, this may be a bit of an unconventional way, but I'm just taking a pen and making tiny little dots where I need the top of the balloon string. And then when I take off the balloons and put them to the side, I'm putting them in the same orientation that I'd like them. If you look closely here, you can see the dots on my cardstock. And again, these are where the top of the balloon string should be. So these all will be hidden by the balloon string itself, and then also the balloons will go over them anyway, just in case it didn't really cover it. I'm using Obsidian ink to ink this balloon string stamp up, and then I'm just going through and making sure that, again, I cover those little dots right at the top with the balloon string stamp. So now that I've got all the strings stamped out, I'm going to use both liquid glue and foam tape to create some dimension with these balloons. So you can see I went ahead and used liquid glue for this green balloon, and I'll do the same with a pink balloon that will go to the left of that green balloon. And the reason that I'm doing this is because these two balloons actually sit behind a yellow star balloon, and I want to make sure that it's emphasized and that the detail of them actually being set farther back is very noticeable. I could have put them all on foam tape and just made sure that I left enough room to put the star balloon in the center, but with having those two circle balloons flat onto the cardstock, you get that extra dimension of them being set farther back in actuality and the foam tape popping out the star balloon. So I went ahead and used some foam tape for most of the other balloons except for that red heart that is set farther back. And now I've got some hanging off the sides. So I'm just going to take my scissors and trim those off by rotating the cardstock or turning the cardstock around and then just chopping off whatever's hanging over. You could absolutely leave them there, but I find it's hard to mail, and I mail most of my cards. So I want to make sure that it's easily fit in the envelope and I don't have any problems. So you can see now I'm stamping my sentiment, and I've got this black piece of cardstock, and it's hard for me to see against my black mat. I could turn this over because Altenew thought about that and gave you a gray side, but just to be easy, I stick a piece of white cardstock underneath, and then it's really easy for me to line up and see where the very bottom of my black cardstock is. So now that I'm trimming that all off, I'm going to go ahead and adhere that to the bottom right hand side with foam tape, and then I add little bits of sequins and confetti that I have in my stash. I hope that you've enjoyed the video and learned a bit about how you can combine both dye inks and pigment inks to create dimension and texture. Please leave any comments or questions that you have in the comments, and you can find all of the products that I used today in the description. Thanks so much for stopping by. I'll see you next time.